Welcome to Mr. Crimeshow. Tonight's episode brings you 8 disturbing true crime cases, each packed with chilling twists and unsettling turns. Paired with the calming sound of rain and a black screen for night listening, this compilation is designed to keep you hooked while helping you relax, unwind, or even fall asleep to true crime. If you appreciate the work, remember to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. She went to a disco, and what happened after is beyond imagination. That Saturday night at the Crown Gardens disco was supposed to be just another evening of dancing and fun. Kim Bari bought her bottle of wine. Her friend Donna left early feeling sick, and Kim decided to stay. What happened in the hours that followed would shock an entire community and become one of Australia's most infamous crimes. 19-year-old Kim Bari was everything you'd want in a daughter. She lived with her parents, Brian and Beverly, and her younger brother Wayne in MT Pleasant, near Wollongong. Kim had dreams that stretched far beyond her small-town life. She wanted to become a nurse, and she already volunteered at Crimeshow, a local hostel where she cared for disabled children with the same gentle kindness she showed everyone. Her co-workers at the local Woolworths knew her as reliable and sweet. Kim had never touched substances, never gotten into trouble, never given her parents a moment's worry. On Friday night, February 6, 1981, Brian and Beverly Bari were out of town for the evening. They'd left Kim to watch her 15-year-old brother Wayne, trusting their responsible daughter to handle things at home. But Kim was 19, and the pull of freedom was strong. She called her friend Donna Holland and suggested they go to the movies and then hit the Crown Gardens disco in town. Wayne would be fine on his own for one night. After the movie and grabbing something to eat, the two friends made their way to Crown Gardens. The disco era was alive and well, and Kim loved to dance. She bought a bottle of Liebfrauwein and settled in for what should have been a normal night out. But as the evening wore on, Donna started feeling sick. The last train was coming. She had to work early the next morning, and she was ready to go home. Kim wanted to stay longer. She checked Kim's purse to make sure she had enough money for a taxi home later, said her goodbyes, and left her friend at the disco. That's when Kim spotted someone she knew at the bar. Graham Jean Potter was a 23-year-old coal miner who'd studied dance at the same school Kim attended. She'd even had a brief crush on him once. What Kim didn't know was that Graham was celebrating his bachelor party that night. He was supposed to marry his girlfriend Sherry in just 8 days, on Valentine's Day. His brother Glenn's 21st birthday was also being celebrated. Graham and Kim sat together, talking and drinking. Around 12:30 in the morning, Graham suggested they go back to his unit in Corrimal. He left his bottle of wine and cardigan with friends, telling them he'd be back soon. Kim walked out of the Crown Gardens disco with him, and except for Graham Potter, no one would ever see her alive again. Potter did return to the disco about an hour later, but he came back alone. He told his brother Glenn that he'd planned to spend the night with Kim, but as soon as they got to his front door, she'd gotten cold feet and left. After the disco closed, Graham and Glenn both went back to Graham's unit, where Glenn fell asleep on the couch, and Graham went upstairs to bed. 2 days later, on Sunday, February 8, apprentice plumber Scott Davies was walking down a track from Jamboree Mountain Lookout, hunting for dumped car parts to fix his old Holden. What he found instead would haunt him forever. Lodged against a tree was the body of a young woman in a crouching position. Her wrists appeared to be bound, and some clothing was wrapped around her arm. Davies scrambled back up the mountain and called police immediately. When investigators arrived and examined the scene more closely, they discovered something deeply disturbing. The woman's remains showed signs of tampering in an attempt to hide her identity. Her head and fingers were missing, and her right arm was broken. The post-mortem confirmed that these acts had been carried out after her death. There was no evidence of any form of intimate assault. The cause of her passing could not be determined from the remains alone. At first, police thought this might be connected to organized crime. Criminal groups were known to remove identifying features from their victims to prevent recognition. They tried to identify the body using palm prints, a painstaking process that had to be done manually back then. When that failed, they made a desperate decision to release photographs of the clothing found with the remains, hoping someone would recognize it. Beverly Bari was watching the news at her MT, Pleasant home, when those photographs appeared on her television screen. Her heart stopped. She recognized those clothes immediately as belonging to Kim, who had been missing since Friday night. Beverly and Brian contacted police right away and were able to identify their daughter's remains by a heart-shaped birthmark below her chest. The investigation moved quickly once police knew who the victim was. They started retracing Kim's last known movements, talking to everyone who'd been at the Crown Gardens disco that Friday night. The bartender remembered selling only one bottle of Liebfrauwein that entire evening, and it had been to Kim. Other witnesses came forward with crucial information. One of Potter's friends remembered his absence from the disco for about an hour. Another witness recalled seeing Potter leave the disco with a young woman and remembered that he'd left a bottle of Liebfrauwein on their table when he departed. When police looked into Potter's background, they discovered something chilling. Before becoming a coal miner, Graham Potter had worked as a mortuary assistant. He would have had experience with procedures that might explain the methodical way Kim's remains had been handled. But when investigators raced to Potter's coronal unit, they found it completely empty. After Potter had fled, Sherry and his parents had thoroughly cleaned out the apartment and put it on the market. Then police found Sherry's car abandoned outside Galburn police station with another love note from Potter to Sherry inside, along with Potter's shirt, stained with what appeared to be blood. Graham Potter had vanished. Police ordered forensic testing of Potter's unit despite its clean state. Forensic biologist Joy Cool made discoveries that would prove crucial to the case. She found traces of blood in the basin drain and on the bathroom tap. 2 more bloodstains were discovered in the spare bedroom, along with shampoo bubbles on the edge of the wall. Hairs matching Kim's were found in fresh paint on the skirting boards and even in the clothes dryer. DNA testing didn't exist yet, but all the bloodstains matched Kim's extremely rare blood type, which fewer than 1% of the population shared. The forensic evidence painted a grim picture. Police theorized that Potter had ended Kim's life in the spare bedroom, then moved her remains to the bathroom, where the attempts to remove identifying features had taken place. Among Potter's belongings stored at his parents' house, investigators found a hacksaw, bloody sheets, and a dressing gown cord that matched the dressing gown later found in a bag with Kim's belongings. 3 weeks after Kim's remains were discovered, another breakthrough came by accident. A man driving down Jamboree Mountain Road let his dog out for a walk, but when he called the animal back, it didn't return. Searching the bush, he found his dog next to a human skull. The skull showed a large section of missing bone on the left side of the brow, indicating it had been struck with a heavy object. Dental records confirmed this was Kim's head. Police searching the immediate area found a trail of hair leading to a plastic garbage bag containing a bloodstained dressing gown, sheets, and Kim's missing fingers. They now had physical evidence of how the crime had been committed and where Kim's remains had been disposed of. In April 1981, Potter finally reappeared at his parents' house. There was a tearful family reunion, but his family knew he was wanted by police. When Potter went to take a bath, his father Sonny made the difficult decision to call authorities. Police arrived and arrested Graham Potter, but he refused to answer any questions, make any statement, or provide blood or hair samples. The trial began in April 1982, and Potter's defense strategy was unlike anything the court had seen. Rather than taking the witness stand where he could be cross-examined, Potter chose to give what's called a doc statement, essentially telling his version of events without having to face questions from prosecutors. Potter's story was elaborate, and to many observers, completely unbelievable. According to Potter, Kim had told him at the disco that 2 men had been bothering her. She was afraid they'd be waiting for her outside and asked if she could go to his house, because she was too scared to go home. They took a taxi to his unit, and when Potter asked Kim to pay for the ride, she opened her purse to reveal several packets of white powder, but no money. Potter claimed that soon after they arrived at his unit, there was a knock at the door. Thinking it was a friend who'd missed the bachelor party, Potter opened it to find two strange men in dark glasses who forced their way inside. They asked to speak with Kim alone, so Potter went upstairs while Kim talked to them in the living room. Potter said he heard shouting and loud noises, and when he ran back downstairs, he found Kim on the floor with one man standing over her and the other going through her purse. According to Potter's account, the men threatened to do the same to him if he didn't cooperate. They told him he'd be blamed for the crime since it happened in his unit, and ordered him to return to the disco and act as if nothing had happened. Potter claimed he followed these instructions because he was terrified. Potter's story continued with even more unlikely details. He said that when he and his brother Glenn returned to the unit at 4 a.m., a blanket had been thrown over the spot where Kim had been lying. Glenn fell asleep on the couch, and Potter went to bed. After Glenn left at 7:00 a.m., the two mysterious men supposedly returned. They took Potter upstairs, where Kim's remains had been moved to the spare room. Potter claimed he watched helplessly as the men carried out the disturbing removal of identifying features using tools from his kitchen. The men then told Potter he had to dispose of the remains and left. Potter said he wrapped Kim's body in sheets, placed her head in his dressing gown, put her fingers in one bag and her belongings in another. He drove to Jamboree Mountain Lookout and dumped everything in separate locations. Police immediately found Potter's story full of holes. Why would clean-living Kim, who'd never been involved with substances, have packets of white powder in her purse, and why would she show them to Potter? Potter claimed Kim had no money, but her friend Donna had checked her purse before leaving and confirmed Kim had two $2 notes for taxi fare. If Potter was truly threatened by these men and told to return to the disco, why didn't he go to police, especially since the disco was close to Wollongong police station? Why would Potter bring his brother back to the unit, knowing the body and the dangerous men might still be there? And why would he calmly go to bed without searching for the men or the body? Most damning of all, Potter claimed the crime happened in the living room, but forensic evidence clearly showed Kim had been harmed in the spare bedroom. Potter had also disposed of the body, head, and bags in separate locations, suggesting he knew exactly what he was doing. The court ordered an investigation into Potter's claims about the two mysterious men. Potter worked with police to create identikit images of his supposed attackers, but experts noted that witnesses usually choose facial features like eyes first, while Potter kept changing the eyes in his pictures. When police showed these images to witnesses from the Crown Gardens disco, not one person remembered seeing either of these men. The prosecution's case was built on overwhelming forensic evidence. Joy Cool testified about the blood evidence found throughout Potter's unit. Detective Sergeant Henry de Laforce presented evidence showing that markings on Kim's bones matched Potter's hacksaw perfectly. The prosecution called more than 50 witnesses who painted a clear picture of Potter's guilt. The defense had little to work with beyond Potter's unbelievable story. They argued that police had provided no clear motive for the crime, and that the fact that Kim's fingers had been removed in two different ways proved that two people must have been involved. But their arguments couldn't overcome the mountain of physical evidence pointing directly at Potter. After hearing all the testimony and examining all the evidence, the jury deliberated for just over an hour before returning with their verdict. Graham Jean Potter was found guilty of Kim Bari's death and sentenced to life in prison. Even while incarcerated, Potter married his girlfriend Sherry. In 1990, he briefly escaped from Bathurst jail with another inmate, but was recaptured the next day. His life sentence was later reduced under new legislation, and he served 14 years before being released on parole in 1996. Throughout his imprisonment and after his release, Potter never admitted his guilt and never wavered from his fantastic story about two mysterious men. Police believe they know what really happened that night, though Potter's refusal to confess means the full truth may never be known. Investigators theorize that Kim went to Potter's unit willingly, perhaps intending intimacy, but changed her mind once they arrived. She may have discovered Potter had a girlfriend and was engaged to be married. This rejection likely sent Potter into a rage, and he struck her with a heavy object, possibly a rolling pin that was later found with Kim's belongings. The post-mortem showed Kim's stomach was empty, even though she and Donna had eaten before going to the disco. This suggested Kim lived long enough to digest her food completely, meaning she didn't pass away immediately from the first blow, but was left unconscious. When Potter returned from the disco, he discovered Kim was still alive and struck her again. When that still didn't end her life, he suffocated her until she was gone. Kim's teeth showed subtle signs of this, with discoloration indicating pressure. Kim Bari's story shocked Australia and remains one of the country's most unsettling crimes. Her parents, Brian and Beverly, faced every parent's worst nightmare when they had to identify their daughter's remains by a birthmark. The community of Wollongong was forever changed by the senseless act that took the life of a young woman who had done nothing but show kindness to everyone she met. Kim's dreams of becoming a nurse and helping others were stolen by a moment of uncontrolled violence that no family should ever have to endure. Four teen girls closed up a yogurt shop, but the truth about that night remains terrifying. Most stories about unsolved crimes begin with the shadows left behind, but the yogurt shop case lingers in the open. A small Austin storefront gutted by fire, 4 lives lost, and more than 3 decades of unanswered questions. On December 6, 1991, 4 teenage girls entered I Can't Believe It's Yogurt in northwest Austin, each expecting an ordinary night. By midnight, their families were searching, and the entire city would soon mourn, haunted by a crime difficult to comprehend and impossible to forget. Jennifer Harbison, age 17, and Eliza Thomas, also 17, spent the evening working behind the counter. Jennifer's younger sister Sarah, 15, and her friend Amy Ayers, 13, were both waiting inside for a ride home after closing time. The girls enjoyed each other's company in what should have been a place of comfort, surrounded by the swirl of soft serve, the hum of machinery, and the slow passage of a Friday night shift. Outside, the rhythms of family life unfolded around them. Jennifer and Sarah were close siblings. Sarah looked up to Jennifer, often emulating her older sister's confidence and warmth. The Harbisons, like the Thomases and the Ayers family, were tightly knit, their shared history marked by ordinary joys and occasional separations characteristic of families navigating adolescence and the challenges of growing up in late 20th century Texas. Eliza, the only child of Sonora Thomas, was described as bright and gentle. Amy, the youngest girl, was cherished by her parents who cared deeply for her safety. Though not all family details were laid bare in official reports, interviews with friends and relatives revealed warm home lives and soft encouragement, with parents and guardians doing what they could to nourish, sometimes shield, their children amid Austin's expanding suburbs. That night, sometime between 8 and 10 p.m., Eliza's mother stopped briefly at the yogurt shop. She remembered seeing a pair of teenage boys, one of whom asked for the restroom. Other witnesses from the neighborhood recalled seeing unusual activity inside. A couple departing just before closing reported noticing 2 men behaving oddly near a table. These accounts became threads for investigators trying to untangle what happened as the closing hour approached. Just before 11, Jennifer locked the front door, following standard procedure. This was the last confirmed time when she, her sister, and their friends were known to be alive. According to later witness statements, a man had spent an unusual amount of time in the restroom, possibly jamming open the rear door, a detail investigators found crucial, suggesting how the perpetrators may have entered or exited the store after hours. Fire swept through the building late that night. Minutes before midnight, a patrol officer driving past noticed smoke rising into the sky. He radioed for help and firefighters arrived rapidly, dousing the flames that consumed the small shop. Inside, they found the remains of Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy. The scene was heartbreaking. There were signs the girls had faced distress, and it appeared the suspects had tried to cover their tracks with fire. Reports confirmed each girl had lost her life due to the actions of another, and investigators determined that 2 firearms had been used, a .22 and a .380 caliber weapon. The nature of the crime, organized, controlled, deliberate, hinted at adult perpetrators experienced in serious offenses. For the families, that night shattered their worlds. The Harbisons and the Ayers family faced the unimaginable task of identifying their daughters. The Thomas family grieved quietly at home, surrounded by friends, neighbors, and relatives arriving in the early hours to offer comfort that could not repair what had been lost. In interviews and documentaries, parents, such as Amy Ayers' father, said they struggled for years with disbelief, while Sonora Thomas described the ongoing sorrow as a kind of torment, worsened by the case remaining unresolved. The girls, teachers, and counselors remembered them as diligent students and loyal friends, their futures cut tragically short. School memorials and neighborhood vigils became routine in the weeks that followed, reinforcing the sense that the whole city was in mourning. As the fire's smoke faded, the Austin Police Department launched a massive investigation, aided by federal agencies and the FBI. Initially, clues were frustratingly few. The fire and subsequent cleanup contaminated much of the crime scene, while arson destroyed potential physical evidence. Still, some fragments remained. A DNA sample from an unidentified male, traces of gunshot residue, and testimony from witnesses who saw potential suspects lingering at the shop before closing. The pain of the families extended beyond their own living rooms. Many court hearings and briefings followed. Family members attended nearly every one, seeking answers, closure, or just some proof the authorities had not forgotten their daughters. They testified about their home lives, the memories of small family rituals, shared dinners, rides to school, encouragements at sports or debate competitions. Jennifer and Sarah's parents, in separation but sharing custody, often described how their home was knit back together by the girls, warmth, even during difficult times when siblings moved between households. Eliza Thomas's mother spoke movingly of her daughter's resilience amid change and the impact her passing had on everyone who loved her. Interviews with staff at the girls, schools, and local counselors painted a fuller picture. Amy Ayers was remembered as cheerful and energetic, a girl who loved animals and soccer. Sarah's teachers saw her as diligent and sensitive. Jennifer was known for her maturity and leadership, while Eliza excelled in science, dreaming of a future in environmental work. These recollections appeared in court testimony, included with the hope that the jury would understand the depth of the loss experienced by the families and the community. Investigators followed every lead, welcoming tips and walking back through the neighborhood repeatedly. They questioned local teens about who had visited the yogurt shop on that Friday night. Forensic teams combed the scene again for any trace missed in the initial hours after the fire. Detectives revisited the existence of a .22 caliber gun, recalling that, in the days after the incident, one teenager, Morris Pierce, was arrested with a .22 at a nearby mall, though lack of immediate evidence led to his release. Years went by before any arrests were made. The city struggled with the public's frustration. The Harbison, Thomas, and Ayers families appeared frequently in newspapers, providing carefully worded statements through attorneys and victim support groups. Court records reveal that the family's pain was compounded by the drawn-out nature of the investigation, which often promised closure only to fall short. By 1999, a new team of investigators, determined to break the case open, focused on a group of teenage boys who were associated with the yogurt shop that night. Morris Pierce, Michael Scott, Robert Springsteen, and Forrest Wellborn came under scrutiny, partly because of their social ties and partly because of the earlier arrest. Investigators spent months interrogating the young men, pursuing confessions and comparing their timelines. Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott ultimately provided written statements during lengthy police questioning. In those confessions, details emerged that appeared to match aspects of the crime scene. Descriptions of doors left open, details about money, and recollections that coincided with witness accounts. Both implicated the others, yet also contradicted themselves, sometimes denying their own role, sometimes blaming someone else for the worst actions. At trial, both prosecution and defense presented a long roster of witnesses. Eliza's mother described seeing two teenage boys in the shop during the crucial evening hours. Another witness, Lucella Jones, reported seeing two boys at around 8:15 p.m. A third, Deal Croft, saw a young man around 10 p.m. asking to use the restroom. These testimonies supported fragments of the confessions given by Scott and Springsteen, even as details sometimes conflicted, such as whether certain doors were left ajar and who used the back exit. The court proceedings were tense and emotional. The prosecutor argued that the written confessions matched essential details from the crime scene, urging the jury to find them reliable. Defense lawyers, meanwhile, highlighted inconsistencies. The kind of locks on the back door, whether confessions were coerced, the unreliability of statements made under pressure, and the absence of forensic evidence linking the accused directly to the crime scene. Courtroom testimony from detectives was pivotal. They described how suspects were first evasive, then shifted their stories under repeated questioning. Transcripts confirmed Michael Scott, at times tearful and confused, insisted he didn't remember going inside, though detectives pressed that he must have, given other statements. These moments played out over hours in front of the jury, who had the task of weighing emotional confessions against the absence of DNA evidence. The trials lasted weeks, family members attending every day. After heated and lengthy deliberations, the jury found Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen guilty of capital murder, with sentences ranging from life imprisonment to death, though both would later be overturned. Family members made impact statements describing the magnitude of their loss, emphasizing that the absence of closure left wounds that would never fully heal. The judge acknowledged the pain suffered by both the victims' families and the defendants' relatives, remarking that the case's complexity was only equaled by the depth of the tragedy. Counselors and friends offered statements about the moral cost. Interview excerpts from the documentary, The Yogurt Shop Murders, captured the continued trauma felt by everyone involved. Some relatives, like Sonora Thomas, described a kind of torment in the uncertainty and in the ongoing burden of unresolved grief. Teachers who attended the proceedings expressed their heartbreak at seeing bright students remembered only through the lens of a devastating crime. After sentencing, it became clear that appeals were certain. The defense immediately contested the verdicts on constitutional grounds. Central to the appeals was the use of confessions against each defendant in court while denying cross-examination, a violation of the Sixth Amendment. The sole substantive evidence against Scott and Springsteen remained their own statements, which they recanted, alleging coercion. Further complicating matters was the emergence of new DNA evidence from one of the girls that matched neither Scott nor Springsteen and could not be tied to Pierce or Wellborn. By 2009, the Texas courts overturned the convictions. Both men were released, all charges were dismissed, and Morris Pierce and Forrest Wellborn never faced trial due to lack of evidence and insufficient forensic connections. Detectives admitted that some interrogation tactics had crossed ethical boundaries, including allegedly threatening suspects. New genetic testing failed to match any of the original suspects to the DNA found at the scene, deepening the mystery and adding frustration for the families desperate for answers. In the wake of overturned verdicts, family statements to the press sounded notes of determination and exhaustion. For the Harbisons, Ayers, and Thomas families, each ruling felt like another wound. The girls, siblings, described lives marked by loss, but also by a stubborn hope that advances in forensic science would someday provide justice. Teachers continued to honor the victims with annual memorial events at their schools. Counselors worked with other students in grief groups, and investigators reassured the families that they had not stopped searching for the truth. The case remains open, unsolved. Decades on, unnamed suspects linger in the historical record. Investigators in the 2020s found promising new leads in advanced DNA testing. Reports indicated the FBI possesses an unidentified sample that could point to the true perpetrator, but bureaucratic hurdles persist, preventing Austin detectives from accessing the necessary evidence to make a definitive identification. Meanwhile, the HBO docuseries The Yogurt Shop Murders has rekindled public attention, providing families a platform to share their memories and their longing for closure, and offering investigators renewed tools and community support to keep the search alive. As of September 2025, Sergeant Dan Jackson of the Austin Police Department continues to assert his belief that the case can be solved. With new technology, investigators hope that one day justice will be delivered, not only for Amy, Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza, but also for the families, friends, and community members whose lives were forever altered that December night. In interviews conducted for the documentary, family members quietly recall small details: a favorite ice cream flavor, a shared joke, a school project never finished. Siblings and parents express their gratitude for every person who still remembers the girls, who tempers curiosity with compassion. The families have endured decades of heartbreak, made heavier by the lack of answers and the constant national attention. Their pain is echoed in statements from teachers, counselors, and neighbors whose lives became interwoven with the public tragedy. There is no closure, no healing that could ever restore what was lost. Yet through court hearings, appeals, memorials, and every frustrating turn in the investigation, one truth remains. The victims were loved deeply, missed fiercely, and remain central to the story. The city of Austin, the nation, and every person searching for justice owes them a promise to never stop asking what happened, and to never let their memory be lost in the silence. In closing, my heart goes out to Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, Amy, and to their families and friends. May their memories guide us toward compassion, inspire renewed efforts for truth, and remind every investigator, neighbor, and journalist that justice, though delayed, is still worth pursuing, as long as those we have lost are remembered and honored. The Forbidden Island, where outsiders don't return. In the early morning darkness of November 17, 2018, fishermen watched from their boat as a young man paddled his yellow kayak toward the forbidden shore of North Sentinel Island for the final time. John Allen Chow had already been injured by an arrow, had his kayak stolen, and faced hostile warriors armed with bows. But he went back anyway. 26-year-old John Allen Chow was born on December 18, 1991, in Scottsboro, Alabama, to parents who had vastly different backgrounds but shared a deep Christian faith. His mother, Linda Adams Chow, was a European-American organizer for Chi Alpha, a Christian ministry organization. His father, Patrick Chow, was a Chinese-American psychiatrist who had fled mainland China during Mao's Cultural Revolution, enduring 6 years of forced labor harvesting rice before escaping to America. Patrick had experienced firsthand the devastating power of extreme ideologies, yet his youngest son would grow up embracing another form of religious extremism that would ultimately cost him his life. The Chow family lived comfortably in Vancouver, Washington, in a 2-story home with 3 garage doors and a well-kept front garden featuring a fountain. John was the youngest of 3 children, with an older brother Brian and sister Marilyn. Their doormat proclaimed their faith with the biblical verse, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." The family attended the Chinese Evangelical Church of Vancouver, where John's faith was nurtured from an early age. As a child, John read Robinson Crusoe, the classic tale of a castaway who spends decades on a desert island where he meets a native man and converts him to Christianity. At just 10 years old, John told his father he wanted to live like that someday. He attended Vancouver Christian High School, where his missionary calling became clearer. At 16, John traveled to Mexico with a school friend to help build an orphanage, an experience that proved revelatory for him. In a video from that time, the athletic young man in polo shirt and jeans stood nervously before an audience, declaring that Christians couldn't just party and get drunk, but had to follow Christ's calling. He quoted from the Gospel of Matthew what evangelicals call the Great Commission. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. It was during high school that John first discovered the Sentinelese tribe on a website listing unreached peoples around the world. He became fascinated by this isolated hunter-gatherer tribe living on North Sentinel Island in the Indian Ocean, one of the most remote places on Earth. The Sentinelese were known to strongly reject all contact with outsiders, but for John, this only made them the ultimate missionary challenge. He told friends he saw it as his calling to go to this island and tell its inhabitants about Jesus Christ. What initially sounded like teenage fantasy became an obsession that would consume John's entire adult life. He attended Oral Roberts University in Oklahoma, where he managed the soccer team and graduated cum laude in 2014 with a Bachelor of Science in Exercise Science. But everything John did seemed calculated to prepare him for his ultimate mission to North Sentinel Island. He trained as a wilderness paramedic so he could treat his own injuries if necessary. He attended a 9-week course that taught students how to quickly pick up unfamiliar languages. He worked as a forest ranger, living for months in an isolated hut to build his survival skills. He went on missionary trips to Mexico, South Africa, and Iraqi Kurdistan, gaining experience working with different cultures. John spent much of his free time exploring nature, fishing, hiking, kayaking, and camping in harsh conditions. He even survived being bitten by a rattlesnake. These weren't just hobbies. They were training for the mission that had captured his imagination years earlier. John made multiple trips to the Andaman Islands, the archipelago that includes North Sentinel, establishing contacts in the small Christian community there. The climax of his preparation came through All Nations, an evangelical mission agency that specialized in reaching unreached peoples. They organized a role-playing exercise where John was dropped off in a remote Kansas forest and had to walk for hours until he encountered people who spoke an incomprehensible language and threatened him with spears. This elaborate training exercise, featuring Americans in disguise, was designed to prepare him for what might await him on North Sentinel. John's friend John Middleton Ramsey, who met him during a Christian tour of Israel in 2015, became one of his closest confidants. Ramsey later recalled that when John visited his family near Seattle, he confided his plans about the Sentinelese. John told the Ramseys how unwelcoming the tribe was towards strangers and how he wanted to reach them. When John's own family criticized his plans, he turned to Ramsey's mother for help. She was a trained editor who revised John's 10-page report about the Sentinelese and helped him compile his curriculum vitae. This became John's application to All Nations, the organization that would eventually sponsor his mission. John's father, Patrick, grew increasingly concerned about his son's evangelical fervor. Patrick had experienced the dangers of extreme ideology during China's Cultural Revolution, and he saw troubling parallels in his son's missionary zeal. In messages he sent after John's passing, Patrick compared his son to a religious extremist who had died pursuing a cause, writing that the extreme of evangelical is equally dangerous as the extreme of Muslim. When Patrick tried to discuss these concerns with John, they agreed to disagree, and Patrick stopped trying to dissuade his son from his mission. Before traveling to India for his final journey, John spent his last few weeks with a missionary mentor in South Africa. Their goodbye was unlike any other, the friend later recalled, comparing it to what parents must have felt when sending their children off to war. John knew he might not return, but his conviction that the eternal souls of the Sentinelese were at stake outweighed his fear of what might happen to him. In October 2018, John arrived in Port Blair, the capital of the Andaman Islands. He spent 11 days hiding in a safe house arranged by his local contact, Alexander Calathundel Sam, a computer programmer and devout Christian who shared John's dream of reaching the Sentinelese. Alex, as John called him, had been nursing the same idea for years. He believed it was an illusion to think the Sentinelese could be permanently sealed off from the modern world, and that John could introduce them to contemporary life slowly and carefully. During his time in the safe house, John's tan began to fade from lack of sunlight, but he stayed fit by doing push-ups and exercising. He spent much of his time in prayer and reading, writing in his diary about how God had chosen him to be a messenger of the gospel to the people of North Sentinel Island. Alex noticed that John was under tremendous strain during those final days, aware that many people were involved in the mission and understanding how important it was. On the evening of November 14, 2018, John met with the fishermen who would take him to North Sentinel Island. They were all Christians from the Karen ethnic minority, a deeply religious people who had been converted to Christianity by American Baptists in the early 19th century. According to police investigations, John paid them 25,000 rupees, about $350, for the risky journey. The fishermen knew they were breaking Indian law, which prohibited anyone from coming within 5 kilometers of North Sentinel Island, but Police Chief Dipendra Pathak later said they were motivated not just by money, but by their Christian faith. John wrote in his diary that evening, thanking God for choosing him as a messenger and outlining his plan to make progressive contact with fish as gifts over the next 4 days. The plan was to link up with the fishing crew and depart that night, arriving at the shore around 4 a.m. John ended that diary entry with Soli Deo Gloria, glory to God alone. The fishing boat departed Port Blair around 8 p.m. on November 14, traveling under cover of darkness to avoid Coast Guard and Navy patrols that monitored the waters around North Sentinel Island. John wrote in his diary that God himself was shielding us from the Coast Guard and Navy patrols when they safely reached the forbidden waters. At 4:30 a.m. on November 15, they entered a cove on the western shore of North Sentinel Island. As the sun began to rise, John and 2 fishermen jumped into the shallow water. The dead coral was sharp, and John immediately got a scratch on his right leg. They could see a Sentinelese dwelling and waited for the inhabitants to emerge. Around 8:30 a.m., John made his first attempt at contact. He had prepared 2 large fish as gifts, a barracuda and half a tuna, which he placed on top of his yellow kayak. As he paddled toward the shore, about 400 yards out, he heard women chattering. Then John saw movement on the beach. 2 armed Sentinelese men came rushing out, yelling at him. John hollered back, "My name is John. I love you and Jesus loves you. Jesus Christ gave me authority to come to you. Here is some fish." He watched them ready their bows and quickly threw the half tuna toward them. When they picked up the fish, John turned and paddled back to the boat as fast as he could, disappointed that they hadn't accepted him right away, but grateful to escape. After a meal of dal and rice, John decided to make a second approach that afternoon. This time, the encounter would be far more dangerous. He loaded his waterproof Bible, medical supplies, and various gifts including scissors, fishing hooks, and safety pins into his kayak. Unfortunately, his passport was also in the waterproof case. As John approached the shore again, he could see about 6 Sentinelese people watching him from their hut. He tried to parrot their words back to them, which caused them to burst out laughing, though John suspected they were probably mocking him. John sang worship songs and hymns to the islanders, and they often fell silent during these moments. But a child and young woman appeared with bows drawn, and despite John's attempts to wave his hands and signal, no bows, they didn't understand. A little boy, probably around 10 years old, came down to the water's edge with his bow and arrow. John figured this was his moment. He preached to them starting with Genesis and got out of his kayak to show them he had 2 legs like they did. He gave gifts to an unarmed man, but then the Sentinelese took his kayak. The little boy shot an arrow directly at John, striking the waterproof Bible he was holding in front of his chest. John grabbed the arrow shaft as it broke against the Bible and felt the tip. He stumbled backward, yelling at the child, then had to swim nearly a mile back to the fishing boat. Although he had lost his kayak and the case containing his passport and medical supplies, John wrote that he was grateful he still had God's written word. Back on the fishing boat, John reflected on what had happened. "It's weird. Actually, no, it's natural. I'm scared," he wrote in his diary. "There, I said it. Also frustrated and uncertain. I don't want to die." He wondered if it would be wiser to leave and let someone else continue the mission. But then he reminded himself that he was stuck anyway without a passport and having been off the grid. That evening, John watched the sunset and found it beautiful, but he was crying. He wrote that he was wondering if it would be the last sunset he'd see before being in the place where the sun never sets. "I miss my parents, my mom and my dad and Brian and Marilyn, and someone I can talk to and be understood," he wrote. "I've never felt this much grief or sorrow before. Why? Why did a little kid have to shoot me today?" His high-pitched voice still lingers in my head. Despite his fear and loneliness, John's determination remained unshaken. He prayed for God to forgive the people who were trying to harm him, especially if they succeeded in ending his life. "Lord, is this island Satan's last stronghold, where none have heard or even had a chance to hear your name?" he asked. John decided that the plan for the next day would be for the boat to drop him at his cached supplies and then leave for the day, returning at night. If things went badly, he wrote, the fishermen wouldn't have to witness his passing. Before leaving letters for his family, John wrote specifically to his friend Alex. "Alex, I'm so grateful to you and to your simple obedience to God and how you've served this mission with your very best. I think I might not survive, and I wish I could have had more time to express my thanks to you." He signed it, "I'll see you again, bro, and remember, the first one to heaven wins." John also wrote to his family, knowing these might be his final words to them. "Brian and Marilyn and Mom and Dad, you guys might think I'm crazy in all this, but I think it's worth it to declare Jesus to these people. Please do not be angry at them or at God if I don't make it." He told his family this wasn't a pointless thing, that the eternal lives of the tribe were at stake, and that he couldn't wait to see them around the throne of God. "I love you all," he concluded. On the morning of November 16, John woke after what he described as a fairly restful sleep. At 6:20 a.m., he wrote his final diary entry. "Woke up after a fairly restful sleep, heading to Island now. I hope this isn't my last notes, but if it is, to God be the glory. I'm heading back to the hut I've been to, praying it goes well. John Chow." John gave his 13 pages of diary entries and letters to the fishermen, instructing them to pass everything to Alex if something happened to him. He told them, "Go, signaling that they should leave him and return to the open sea. The fishermen watched from a distance as John paddled his replacement kayak toward the shore for the third and final time. When the fishermen returned to North Sentinel Island that evening, they could not find John. They waited all night, but he never appeared at their agreed meeting point. Early the next morning, November 17, the fishermen saw a group of sentinels on the beach. One man was dragging something behind him. The fishermen looked more closely through their binoculars and realized it was John Chow. The sentinels dug a grave in the sand and buried him. The fishermen immediately left North Sentinel Island and returned to Port Blair the next day. Following John's instructions, they gave his diary and letters to Alexander Calathundle Sam. Alex photographed the pages and sent them to All Nations, John's mission agency in Kansas. All Nations then informed John's mother about her son's fate. Unlike what John and Alex had planned, the mission couldn't be kept secret. John's mother contacted the American consulate and sent excerpts from his diary to the Washington Post. On November 18, 2018, an email from the American consulate appeared in the inbox of Dipendra Pathak, the most senior policeman in the Andaman Islands. The message said that the sentinels were presumed to have caused the death of an American citizen. For Pathak, who normally dealt with thefts and occasional poaching cases, this would become the most complicated case of his career. Pathak immediately launched an investigation. Police arrested the 5 fishermen and Alex, the computer programmer who had helped coordinate John's mission. They impounded the fishing boat and opened 2 case files. In the first, they investigated unknown sentinels for causing a death. In the second, They investigated the fishermen and helpers for their role in John's mission. Pathak approached North Sentinel Island twice with a team of officials and experts on a Coast Guard boat. They stayed at a safe distance, about 400 meters offshore, but could see people on the beach armed with bows and arrows. Any outsider who has contact with them is putting their health at risk, Pathak explained. They haven't encountered the germs and viruses we carry. Scientists had told him about historical cases where isolated groups hadn't survived contact with modern pathogens. The investigation revealed that John had broken multiple laws in his attempt to reach the Sentinelese. North Sentinel Island had been protected under the Andaman and Nicobar Islands Protection of Aboriginal Tribes Regulation Act since 1956. The Indian government maintained a 5-kilometer exclusion zone around the island, patrolled by Navy and Coast Guard vessels. Anyone violating these restrictions faced fines and imprisonment. Pathak found himself dealing with contradictory laws. On one hand, it was forbidden to set foot on North Sentinel Island. On the other hand, it was forbidden to take another person's life. Was this really a case of taking a life, or was it self-defense by people protecting their home from an illegal invader? In the end, Pathak decided not to arrest any Sentinelese or drag them into a courtroom. He believed the only ones who should be punished were those who intentionally broke the law. The fishermen knew it was illegal. They did it anyway, and they knew they were sending John Chow to certain consequences, Pathak concluded. The fishermen were charged with culpable homicide, not amounting to intentional killing, along with violations of laws protecting indigenous tribes. They spent several weeks in police custody before being released pending trial. If convicted, they could face up to 10 years in prison. Alexander Calathundel Sam was also charged and faced the same potential sentence. He lost his job as a computer programmer and struggled with the public scrutiny. "I'm mentally preparing myself for the fact that I will soon have to go to jail," Alex said. The story of John Chow's mission divided opinions around the world. Some saw him as a martyr who died trying to bring salvation to an isolated people. Others viewed him as a reckless colonist whose illegal actions endangered the very people he claimed to want to help. Jeff King, president of International Christian Concern, defended John's actions, saying, "This was not a job he was doing. This was a dream he had that unfortunately went wrong." John's family issued a statement forgiving the Sentinelese people. They wrote, "He ventured out of love. We forgive those reportedly responsible for his passing. We also ask for the release of those friends he had in the Andaman Islands. He would not want them to suffer for his own actions." The Sentinelese, meanwhile, remained as isolated as ever. Anthropologist Triloki Nath Pandit, who spent decades studying the tribe and was the only researcher ever to set foot on their island, had long advocated leaving them in peace. "I told them the Sentinelese are lacking nothing, and if they need us, they will come and find us," he had advised the Indian government. The protective laws around North Sentinel Island remained in force, and authorities continued to patrol the waters to prevent other unauthorized visitors. In John's final letter before his last approach to the island, he had written specific instructions about his remains. "Do not retrieve my body," he wrote emphatically. "This is not a trivial matter. The eternal lives of this tribe are at stake." Indian authorities honored this request, making no further attempts to recover him from North Sentinel Island. John Allen Chow was just 26 years old when he lost his life, pursuing what he believed was God's calling to reach one of the world's last uncontacted peoples. His story remains a powerful reminder of how religious conviction, when taken to extremes, can lead to tragic consequences for everyone involved. The young man who dreamed of becoming a modern-day missionary ultimately became a cautionary tale about the collision between faith and cultural preservation in our modern world. A single ledger entry solved a 44-year-old mystery, and it's heartbreaking. A single line in a forgotten cemetery legend would eventually unlock one of Ohio's most haunting cold cases. Entry 82,483 simply read unidentified white female bones. But behind those words lay the tragic story of a 17-year-old girl who had been missing for over 4 decades. Linda Marie Pagano was born on April 11, 1957, the youngest of 3 children in an Akron, Ohio family. She had an older brother, Michael, and an eldest sister, Cheryl, both of whom would spend decades wondering what had happened to their beloved little sister. Linda was a student at Springfield High School, known to those who loved her as honest, hard-working, and shy. She had an after-school job serving food at the A&W restaurant in nearby Tallmadge, and like many teenagers of her generation, she was passionate about rock music. During the summer of 1974, Linda and her siblings were living with their stepfather, Byron Claflin, in his apartment on Carnegie Avenue in Akron. Claflin worked as a bartender and was described by those who knew him as a regular drinker with a volatile temper. Despite his reputation for having outbursts, Linda and Claflin were not reported to be on particularly bad terms, making what happened next all the more shocking. On the evening of August 31, 1974, Linda attended a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young concert in Cleveland with her boyfriend, Steve Wilson. The concert was a magical experience for Linda, who loved music and rarely had opportunities for such adventures. She and Steve enjoyed the performance, singing along to songs that spoke to their generation about peace, love, and hope for a better world. After the concert ended, they made the drive back to Akron, arriving in the early morning hours of September 1st. Linda dropped Steve off at his house first, then drove to her stepfather's apartment alone. What happened next would be the subject of decades of speculation and heartbreak, because Byron Claflin was the only witness to the events that followed. According to Claflin's account, Linda's late return at such an odd hour prompted a heated argument between them. He claimed that her behavior angered him so much that he made a drastic decision. He threw her out of the house. According to Claflin's version of events, Linda left the apartment after their confrontation and simply never returned. This would be the last time anyone would see Linda Pagano alive. In the immediate days following her disappearance, family members naturally assumed Linda was staying with friends. It wasn't unusual for teenagers to spend a few days away from home after family conflicts, and everyone expected her to cool down and come back. Claflin even called Michael Pagano's mother to see if Linda was staying with her family. When Linda still hadn't returned after a full day, her family became concerned enough to report her missing to police. However, Linda's case gained very little attention from law enforcement or the media. Police pursued the matter under the assumption that Linda had simply run away, a common conclusion when teenagers disappeared after family arguments. But those who knew Linda best understood that this explanation didn't fit her character at all. She was not regarded as the type of person who would run away without telling anyone where she was going. Perhaps most tellingly, Linda had left behind her prized possession, a Ford Mustang that she cherished. Anyone who truly knew Linda understood that she would never have abandoned that car willingly. It sat in the driveway like a silent testament to the fact that whatever had happened to Linda, it wasn't by her own choice. Months passed without any word from Linda. Her family continued to search, continued to hope, continued to ask questions that no one seemed able to answer. Michael Pagano, her older brother, was particularly persistent in his efforts to find his sister. He contacted police departments, searched through missing person reports, and followed up on any leads that might bring Linda home. On February 5, 1975, just over 5 months after Linda's disappearance, 3 teenage boys were hiking through what is now known as Mill Stream Run Reservation in Strongsville, Ohio. They were exploring the banks of the Rocky River when they made a discovery that would haunt them forever. Scattered along the riverbank were human remains. The boys immediately contacted authorities, and investigators arrived to process the scene. The remains were incomplete, and certain key parts were missing. No physical evidence was recovered from the scene that might help identify the victim or point to a perpetrator. Initial examination determined that the remains belonged to a white female, with age estimates placing her at approximately 20 years old. The cause of death was determined to be from a gunshot, immediately classifying the case as a homicide. Someone had taken this young woman's life and then left her in a remote location, possibly hoping she would never be found. Initially, investigators even considered the possibility that these might be the remains of heiress Patty Hearst, who had disappeared from California in 1974, but this theory was quickly ruled out. When news of the unidentified body reached the media, Michael Pagano immediately felt a chill of recognition. He saw a television broadcast about the discovery and was struck by the timing and location. The remains had been found less than an hour's drive from Akron, and the timeline matched perfectly with Linda's disappearance. Michael called the Strongsville Police Department with his theory that the unidentified victim might be his missing sister. The response he received was devastating in its dismissiveness. Police told Michael that the victim was determined to be too old and likely too tall to be Linda. They didn't ask for dental records, didn't request photographs for comparison, didn't even take detailed notes about Linda's disappearance. With just a brief phone conversation, they dismissed what would later prove to be the correct identification. As weeks turned into months with no identification forthcoming, the remains were eventually interred in an unmarked grave at Memorial Gardens Potter's Field in Highland Hills. The young woman was buried among thousands of other unclaimed souls, with nothing but a number to mark her existence. She became known simply as Woman 82,483, a heartbreaking reduction of what had once been a vibrant human life. For decades, Linda Pagano remained a missing person, while the unidentified remains that were actually hers lay forgotten in an unmarked grave. Michael Pagano never stopped searching for his sister, never stopped hoping for answers, but as the years passed, hope began to fade. The official investigation had long since gone cold, and it seemed as though Linda would remain forever lost. In 2016, 42 years after Linda's disappearance, a remarkable chain of events began to unfold. Christina Scatz, a genealogy student at Cleveland State University, was conducting research on her own family history when she discovered something that wouldn't leave her alone. While poring over cemetery records in the dimly lit university library, she came across entry number 82,483 in a burial ledger. The sparse description read simply, "Unidentified white female bones," but something about those words haunted Scatz. Here was evidence of someone who had once been a living, breathing human being with hopes and dreams and people who loved her, reduced to nothing more than a clinical description in a forgotten file. She found herself thinking about this unknown woman every day, wondering who she had been and why no one had ever claimed her. Scatz tried calling the cemetery for more information, but they had nothing beyond what was already in the records. She contacted Strongsville Police and the Cleveland Metroparks Rangers, but no one seemed to have active files on the case. Frustrated but determined, Scatz began posting about her discovery on internet forums dedicated to unsolved cases. She shared her findings on Reddit, hoping that someone out there might have information that could help identify this forgotten woman. The case caught the attention of Carl Koppelman, a volunteer forensic artist from California who specialized in creating reconstructions of unidentified victims. Koppelman had helped solve numerous cold cases by giving faces back to nameless victims, and he was intrigued by the mystery of Woman 82,483. He reached out to Scatz and began working on creating a facial reconstruction based on the available skull photographs. When Koppelman contacted the Cuyahoga County Coroner's Office about the case, they made a shocking discovery. Due to a clerical error or misspelling, the remains had never been entered into any database of unidentified individuals. For over 4 decades, this young woman had been completely invisible to the systems designed to help identify missing persons and unidentified remains. Once the case was properly entered into NAMUS, the National Database for Missing and Unidentified Persons, a potential match was quickly identified. An internet sleuth on Reddit was the first to suggest that the unidentified remains might belong to Linda Pagano. The age, location, timing, and circumstances all aligned perfectly with Linda's disappearance. Akron police reached out to authorities in Cuyahoga County about the possibility that woman 82,483 was actually Linda Pagano. Dental records were exchanged for preliminary comparison, and discussions began about the possibility of exhuming the body for DNA analysis. After several months of planning and coordination between multiple agencies, the exhumation was performed in October 2017. Finding the correct grave proved challenging, as the Potter's Field contained many unmarked burials with minimal records. The University of Akron assisted with magnetic surveying to map the unmarked grave and locate the right remains. Once the correct body was exhumed, bone samples were taken from the victim, and DNA swabs were collected from Linda's surviving siblings, Cheryl and Michael Pagano. The samples were sent to the University of North Texas for mitochondrial DNA testing, a process that would take several months to complete. During this waiting period, the family dared to hope while trying to prepare themselves for the possibility of disappointment. Michael Pagano, now in his 60s, had spent most of his adult life wondering what had happened to his little sister. On June 29, 2018, the wait finally ended. The DNA results came back with conclusive identification. Woman 82,483 was indeed Linda Marie Pagano. After 44 years of being lost and forgotten, Linda finally had her name back. The Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's office announced the identification at a press conference on July 12, 2018, bringing closure to one of the region's longest-running missing person cases. Michael Pagano's reaction to the news was overwhelming. "I thought I was in a dream," he said when he heard the confirmation. "I thought I would never see this. I thought this day would never come. I thought I would die wondering. I am amazed how this came to light like it did." For decades, he had carried the burden of not knowing what had happened to Linda, and finally, he had at least part of the answer. Christina Scatz, the college student whose curiosity had set this entire chain of events in motion, was equally emotional when she received the news. She was at home, playing video games and browsing Reddit, when she got a message from one of Linda's family members confirming the identification. "I got choked up when I got the news," she recalled. What had started as a genealogy research project had ended up giving a family answers they had sought for nearly half a century. Following the identification, Linda's remains were returned to her family for proper burial. In January 2019, a memorial service was held for Linda, allowing her loved ones to finally say goodbye. The parts of Linda's remains that had been recovered were cremated and interred next to her late mother in Holy Cross Cemetery, where she finally found the peace and dignity that had been denied to her for so long. With Linda finally identified, the focus of the investigation shifted to finding her killer. Because Linda's remains had been found on Cleveland Metroparks land, the investigation falls under the jurisdiction of the Metroparks Police. As of 2022, law enforcement has named 2 persons of interest in the case: Linda's stepfather, Byron Claflin, and her boyfriend, Steve Wilson. Claflin, who had been the last person to see Linda alive and the only witness to their alleged argument, died in 1990, taking whatever secrets he might have held to his grave. Many of Linda's loved ones, including her brother Michael, have long suspected that Claflin was somehow involved in her death, but there has never been enough evidence to prove their suspicions. Steve Wilson, Linda's boyfriend who had accompanied her to the concert that final night, is not considered a suspect, but is regarded as a key witness. Police are particularly interested in locating and interviewing Wilson, as he was one of the last people to see Linda alive. The investigation into Linda's death remains active, with authorities planning to re-interview family members and potential witnesses now that they have a confirmed victim identification. However, Michael Pagano has reported that updates from police regarding the investigation have been scarce since the identification announcement, leaving the family still seeking justice for Linda. The tragic case of Linda Pagano serves as a reminder of how easily someone can be forgotten by the very systems designed to protect them. A simple clerical error kept Linda invisible for over 4 decades, while her family searched in vain and her killer remained free. It also demonstrates the power of persistence and compassion, as shown by Christina Scatz, whose refusal to let a forgotten woman remain nameless ultimately brought Linda home. Today, Linda's legacy lives on not just in the memories of those who loved her, but in the awareness her case has brought to the importance of properly documenting and tracking missing persons and unidentified remains. Her story has inspired others to check on the status of their own missing loved ones and to advocate for better systems to prevent such tragedies from being forgotten. Linda Marie Pagano lost her life due to the actions of someone who has yet to face justice, but her memory endures as a testament to a young woman who deserved so much more than the fate that befell her. Our hearts go out to Michael Pagano, Cheryl Pagano, and all who knew and loved Linda, as they continue to seek the answers and justice that have remained elusive for far too long. The case that exposed a chilling failure in the system. The GPS tracking device attached to Brian Goldsby's ankle had been sending signals all evening, recording his every movement through the streets of Columbus, Ohio. What investigators would later discover from that digital trail would paint a chilling picture of February 8, 2017. The night a promising young woman's dreams came to an end, and a community's faith in the justice system was forever shaken. Reagan Delaney Tokes was born on March 13, 1995, in Edgewood, Kentucky, to parents Toby and Lisa McCrary Tokes. She grew up in Maumee, Ohio, where she became known for her infectious smile and determination to help others. From an early age, Reagan knew exactly what she wanted. When she was just 8 years old, her father took her to an Ohio State football game in 2003. In the middle of the game, she looked up at him with bright eyes and said, "Dad, I want to go here." That moment would define her path forward. Reagan excelled at Anthony Wayne High School in Maumee, where she graduated with a 4.5 GPA and became the first student in the school's history to earn a varsity letter in tennis all 4 years. She was athletic, vibrant, and deeply loved by her family, which included her younger sister, Mackenzie. When Reagan left for Ohio State University, her parents and sister moved to Florida, but Reagan stayed behind to pursue her dream of becoming a Buckeye. Initially, Reagan majored in pre-med, but like many students, organic chemistry proved challenging. Rather than let this discourage her, she switched her major to psychology, driven by her genuine desire to help people. She planned to work at the Cleveland Clinic after graduation and eventually open her own psychology practice to help those struggling with addiction, mental health issues, and other psychological challenges. By early February 2017, Reagan had already applied for graduation and picked out a black frame with the old school Ohio state logo for her diploma. When she posted about it on social media, her father was moved to tears, overwhelmed with pride for his daughter who was so close to achieving her dreams. To support herself through college, Reagan worked at Bodega, a restaurant and bar in Columbus's Short North neighborhood. She was responsible, reliable, and well-liked by her co-workers. On the night of February 8, 2017, she texted her father before her shift, letting him know she would call him after work. It was a routine evening that would end in unimaginable tragedy. Meanwhile, Brian Lee Goldsby, who was born on January 26, 1988, had been roaming the streets of Columbus, looking for his next victim. Goldsby's life had been marked by violence and criminal behavior from an early age. He claimed to have experienced a troubled childhood, though prosecutors would later dispute many of his claims due to inconsistencies in his stories. What was undeniable was his extensive criminal history, which began as a juvenile and included crimes ranging from theft to threatening his mother with a knife. In November 2010, Goldsby committed a serious crime that should have kept him behind bars much longer. He abducted a woman who was 8 months pregnant, along with her 2-year-old son, putting a knife to her throat and threatening the child's life. He subjected the woman to further harm in front of her child and forced her to drive him to ATMs to withdraw money, then to her home where he harmed her again and stole her belongings. When the victim refused to testify, fearing for her and her children's safety, Goldsby was allowed to plead down to robbery and attempted assault charges in May 2011. He received a 6-year sentence, but due to concurrent sentencing and time already served, he was released in November 2016, just months before Reagan's case. Goldsby's behavior in prison had been deeply troubling. He committed 52 infractions, including possessing contraband, refusing to obey orders, stealing, fighting, and creating disturbances. His conduct was so problematic that he was moved between 5 different prisons during his incarceration. Despite this concerning pattern, he was released and required to register as a Tier III offender. Upon his release, Goldsby was placed in a temporary housing center run by the Exit program, equipped with a GPS tracking device that should have been monitoring his movements. However, the oversight was minimal at best. Officials at the housing program allowed him to come and go as he pleased, with only the requirement that he be at the center between 10:00 p.m. and 6:00 a.m. His parole officer, Ryan Hendricks, was responsible for monitoring approximately 100 offenders at any given time. In the weeks leading up to February 8, 2017, Goldsby had violated his parole multiple times. These violations included letting the battery on his GPS bracelet die and spending several nights away from the Exit program's housing center. Although these were considered non-severe violations, they triggered a 3-strike policy that should have resulted in a hearing with the parole board. That hearing was scheduled for no later than February 23, 2017, but it would never take place. During this same period, Goldsby committed 6 separate robberies without being arrested. On January 24, he robbed a woman of $3 at knife point. 3 days later, he robbed another woman for gift cards. On February 1, he took $20 from a man. The next day, he abducted a man at gunpoint and forced him to drive to an ATM, stealing $500. On February 6, he attacked a woman and took $38. On February 7, just 1 day before Reagan's case, he robbed another woman, taking her purse and bag. Each of these crimes went undetected by the monitoring system that was supposed to protect the community. On the evening of February 8, 2017, Reagan finished her shift at Bodega and walked to her car around 9:45 p.m. GPS data would later show that Goldsby had spent about an hour walking in circles near the restaurant, waiting for the right opportunity. When Reagan emerged from work, Goldsby approached her and forced her into her silver Acura TL at gunpoint, beginning a night of terror that would last for hours. During his later interrogation, Goldsby admitted that he told Reagan all he wanted was money and that everything would be all right. But his actions told a different story. He forced Reagan to drive to 2 different ATMs, first to a Chase bank at 10:02 p.m. where they attempted to withdraw $500, then to a Huntington bank 12 minutes later. Both transactions were declined. At 10:18 p.m., Reagan and Goldsby arrived in an alley where they remained for 12 minutes. This is where Goldsby subjected Reagan to harm. The evidence would later show that Reagan complied with every demand, believing that cooperation might save her life. After this, Goldsby forced Reagan to drive back to the first ATM, where she successfully withdrew $60. Throughout this ordeal, Reagan's phone remained active until approximately 2:00 a.m., when the battery died. Her parents, Toby and Lisa, became increasingly worried when she failed to call as promised. They spent the night trying to reach her, sending texts and making calls that would go unanswered. The GPS tracking data and surveillance footage would later reveal that Reagan and Goldsby also stopped at 2 gas stations during the night, a Sunoco station at 11:12 p.m. and a Turkey Hill station at 11:41 p.m. At some point during these stops, Goldsby purchased a gas can, which investigators would later find in Reagan's car. As the night wore on, Goldsby made the calculated decision to end Reagan's life to prevent her from reporting his crimes. During his interrogation, he admitted that Reagan begged for her life, telling him, "All I want to do is lie." These would be among her final words, a desperate plea from a young woman who had so much to live for. Goldsby forced Reagan to drive to Scioto Grove Metro Park in Grove City, Ohio. Once there, he ordered her to park the car and remove her shoes. He then marched her into a field where he tragically ended her life. Reagan lost her life due to the actions of Brian Goldsby just before midnight on February 9, 2017. After taking Reagan's life, Goldsby drove her car to his girlfriend's home. At 1:45 a.m., he and his girlfriend went to McDonald's together, acting as if nothing had happened. He gave his girlfriend Reagan's black Kate Spade purse and white wallet as gifts. Later, he attempted to destroy evidence by disposing of the weapon and unsuccessfully trying to set Reagan's car on fire. The next morning, February 9, a park visitor discovered Reagan's remains in the field at Scioto Grove Metro Park. A tattoo and necklace helped detectives identify her, and her uncle, who lived nearby, officially confirmed the identification. The news that Reagan had not attended her classes prompted her family to file a missing person report. But by then, the devastating truth was already unfolding. The investigation moved swiftly. A digital reader attached to a commercial vehicle had captured the front license plate of Reagan's car after Goldsby abandoned it in southeast Columbus. Inside and around the vehicle, investigators found cigarette butts containing Goldsby's DNA, along with the gas can he had purchased. The GPS bracelet on Goldsby's ankle provided a digital trail that placed him at every location where Reagan had been taken, from bodega to the ATMs to the park where her life ended. On February 11, 2017, at approximately 4:00 a.m., SWAT officers arrested Goldsby. During his interrogation by Detective Rick Forney, Goldsby initially confessed to forcing Reagan to drive to ATMs and to the park, but claimed he left her there alive. When confronted with evidence, he denied having physical contact with her and claimed he didn't have a weapon. Detectives then employed a strategic approach, suggesting that Goldsby must have had an accomplice. This led Goldsby to fabricate an elaborate story about a man named TJ, who supposedly forced him to harm Reagan at gunpoint, threatening Goldsby's children if he didn't comply. "I wanted to just run and call the cops for real. I could have, but at the same time, I didn't want to put my babies in jeopardy," Goldsby told detectives, spinning a tale that investigators knew was false but pretended to believe. While incarcerated awaiting trial, Goldsby confessed the truth to both a friend and the mother of his child, admitting that he had taken Reagan's life. These confessions would later become crucial testimony in his trial. Jury selection for Goldsby's trial began on February 23, 2018, with the actual trial starting on March 5, 2018. Judge Mark Serrott presided over the proceedings, having denied defense requests for a change of venue despite extensive media coverage. Franklin County District Attorney Ron O'Brien told jurors in his opening statement that Reagan experienced a night of terror. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence over several days. Jurors toured the locations where Reagan spent her final hours, viewed photos from the scene, and heard testimony from the witness who discovered her body. Reagan's roommates testified about the night she went missing and identified the Kate Spade purse that Goldsby had stolen from her. On March 8, prosecutors showed the jury the video of Goldsby's interrogation, including his false claims about TJ. Detective Forney took the stand to explain how the investigation unfolded and how evidence led them to Goldsby. The final day of trial brought the most damning evidence. Forensic scientists testified that Goldsby's DNA was linked to Reagan, confirming the assault. Even more telling, Reagan's DNA was discovered on the weapon, indicating it had been pressed against her during the crime. Both Goldsby's friend and the mother of his child testified about his confessions to them, corroborating the prosecution's case. Franklin County Deputy Coroner Dr. Donald Podgman described the two fatal injuries Reagan suffered. explaining that one resulted from the weapon being pressed directly against her. During closing arguments, prosecutors argued that Goldsby took Reagan's life to avoid being caught for his crimes. The defense countered that Goldsby wasn't intelligent enough to plan such an act and suggested he acted out of panic rather than calculation. On March 13, 2018, what would have been Reagan's 23rd birthday, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all 9 counts, including aggravated kidnapping, assault, robbery, and most significantly, aggravated ending of life. As the verdicts were read, Reagan's family was visibly emotional, while Goldsby showed no reaction. The sentencing phase proved more complicated. While 8 jurors voted for the ultimate penalty, 4 voted for life imprisonment, preventing the unanimous decision required under Ohio law. During this phase, Goldsby made his first statement in court, offering a brief apology to Reagan's family and admitting that his fictional accomplice, TJ, never existed. "When I first got locked up, I lied about everything," Goldsby said. "I said there was a TJ, there is no TJ, TJ's not real. I made TJ up." On March 21, 2018, Judge Serrott sentenced Goldsby to life in prison without the possibility of parole, following the jury's recommendation. During the sentencing, Judge Serrott addressed the injustice directly. "Reagan did nothing wrong whatsoever, and yet she forfeited her life because of your background. You get spared because of your background, and yet she forfeited her life." Reagan's mother, Lisa, spoke at the sentencing with remarkable grace and strength. "Regardless of the outcome of today's verdict, it doesn't bring our daughter back," she said. "It doesn't erase the night of terror that Reagan had to endure. It doesn't erase the details and images that are forever burned into our minds. Most importantly, it doesn't change that she wasn't granted her last wish, and to quote our daughter, her last words, 'I just want to live.'" In the aftermath of the trial, prosecutors initially pursued appeals, arguing that legal errors prevented Goldsby from receiving the ultimate penalty. However, under newly elected District Attorney Gary Tyack, the state eventually withdrew its appeal, and Goldsby's life sentence was finalized. Reagan's parents channeled their grief into advocacy, working with lawmakers to create the Reagan-Tokes Act. This legislation, signed into law in 2018 and 2019, implemented significant reforms to Ohio's criminal justice system. The act requires indeterminate sentencing for serious felons, allows for extended incarceration based on prison conduct, and mandates improved GPS monitoring and supervision of released offenders. The Reagan-Tokes Memorial Foundation was established to honor her memory through scholarships, self-defense education, and continued advocacy for criminal justice reform. Reagan received her degree in psychology posthumously during Ohio State's May 2017 graduation ceremony, with her parents and sister accepting the diploma on her behalf. Today, Reagan is remembered not only as a victim of a preventable tragedy, but as a catalyst for meaningful change. A tranquility garden at Scioto Grove Metro Park, complete with swings, pathways, and buckeye trees, serves as a peaceful memorial where her parents can find some measure of comfort. A bronze plaque and yellow magnolia tree on the Ohio State campus ensure that her memory lives on among the Buckeye community she so loved. The Reagan-Tokes case stands as a stark reminder of the deadly consequences when monitoring systems fail and dangerous individuals slip through the cracks. Her story continues to inspire legislative reform and serves as a testament to the enduring love of a family who refused to let their daughter's voice be silenced. In their words, love overcomes everything including evil, and Reagan's legacy of compassion and determination continues to make the world a safer place for others. Reagan Delaney Tokes was just 21 years old when her bright future was stolen away. Though Brian Goldsby's actions ended her physical presence in this world, her spirit and the changes inspired by her story ensure that she will never be forgotten. To her family, friends, and all whose lives she touched, Reagan's memory remains a source of strength and a reminder that even in the darkest moments, love and justice can prevail. The Osaka roommate case. What police found in her apartment will haunt you. In the winter of 2015, a 25-year-old woman made plans to join her family for Christmas dinner, unaware that she would never see another holiday or feel the warmth of her father's embrace again. Her disappearance would lead investigators to one of the most disturbing crimes in modern Japanese history, perpetrated by someone she had once called a friend. Sawako Watanabe was a part-time worker who carried dreams of a better future. At 25, she had been navigating the challenges of young adulthood in Japan, working to support herself while maintaining close ties with her family. Her father would later describe her as a loving daughter who never missed important family gatherings, making her absence on Christmas Day 2015 immediately alarming. Sawako lived a relatively quiet life, sharing accommodations with other young people in a communal living arrangement in Kadoma, Osaka Prefecture. This type of shared housing had become increasingly common among young Japanese adults seeking affordable living situations while building independent lives. The communal house where Sawako lived represented a modern approach to housing for young people in urban Japan. Between August and November 2015, she shared this space with several other residents, including a 29-year-old woman who described herself as an illustrator. Terumi Morishima had moved into the shared housing facility after relocating from Okayama Prefecture to Osaka in July 2015. Morishima told others she had come to care for her aging grandmother, but her financial situation had become increasingly precarious since the move. In Okayama, Morishima had earned approximately 80,000 yen per month working as an illustrator, which provided a modest but sustainable income. However, after relocating to Osaka, her illustration work had virtually disappeared. She found herself struggling to make ends meet with only about 200,000 yen in savings and no steady income. The financial pressure began to weigh heavily on her daily life, creating a desperation that would soon consume her rational judgment. Despite these mounting difficulties, Morishima managed to present herself as a reliable housemate to Sawako and the other residents. During their time living together, Morishima observed Sawako's daily routines and personal habits closely. She learned that Sawako possessed important documents, including her driver's license and residence registry, which Sawako had shared with Morishima as they discussed potential plans to move in together. This seemingly innocent arrangement of potential roommates sharing moving documents would become the foundation for a betrayal that shocked investigators. Morishima began to see these documents not as a symbol of trust, but as an opportunity to solve her financial crisis through deception. In October 2015, while still living in the shared house with Sawako, Morishima made her first illegal use of her friend's identity. Using Sawako's driver's license, she began taking out loans from multiple financial institutions and loan sharks. Over the following months, she continued this pattern of fraud, ultimately stealing 600,000 yen through 11 separate transactions. To successfully impersonate Sawako at various banks, Morishima would remove her glasses, apply false eyelashes, and carefully apply makeup to alter her appearance. Despite not closely resembling Sawako's photo on the license, her confidence and preparation allowed her to deceive bank staff repeatedly. By November 2015, Morishima had moved out of the shared house and into her own apartment approximately 300 meters away. The move allowed her to maintain contact with Sawako while creating more privacy for her increasingly desperate schemes. From her new apartment, she continued her fraudulent activities, eventually accumulating a total debt of 2 million yen. With no legitimate income and her borrowing capacity exhausted, Morishima found herself trapped in a financial crisis that seemed to have no legal solution. During December 2015, as Christmas approached, Morishima's thoughts turned darker. Investigators later discovered that between December 12 and December 22, she had conducted extensive internet searches related to violence and concealment. Her browser history revealed searches for death by choking, perfect crime, ways to eliminate people, and dissolving sedatives in hot water. These searches demonstrated a calculated progression from desperation to premeditation as she began planning what she believed would be the perfect solution to her problems. On the evening of December 24, 2015, Morishima contacted Sawako with an invitation that seemed perfectly innocent. She suggested they hold a Christmas party at her apartment, inviting Sawako and other residents from their former shared house. The invitation appeared to be a natural extension of their friendship and the holiday season. Sawako, who had been looking forward to spending Christmas with her family the following day, agreed to join the celebration. That evening, Sawako arrived at Morishima's apartment to help prepare decorations and dishes for the anticipated party. According to Morishima's later statements to investigators, they worked together on party preparations, creating what appeared to be a normal holiday gathering between friends. At some point during the evening, Morishima claimed she left the apartment to go to the shared house to prepare sashimi for the party. This detail would later become a crucial element in her defense as she attempted to establish an alibi for the events that followed. When Morishima returned to her apartment, she later told investigators she found Sawako lying face down near the front door with her shoes still on and her face showing signs of distress. However, the evidence that investigators would later uncover painted a dramatically different picture of the evening's events. The examination revealed that Sawako had not collapsed naturally, but had instead been deliberately harmed sometime between December 24 and December 25. The findings showed no signs of the accidental collapse that Morishima described to authorities. In the hours following Sawako's loss of life, Morishima embarked on a series of actions that demonstrated careful planning rather than panic. On December 25, using Sawako's bank card, she withdrew more than 100,000 yen from a convenience store ATM. She then used this money to purchase specific items from a hardware store in Kadoma: a freezer, polyethylene bags, a bucket, and a saw. These purchases, made within hours of Sawako's passing, contradicted Morishima's later claims that she had acted in panic upon discovering her friend's collapse. Over the following days, Morishima took steps to hide all physical evidence. She had researched methods for this process during her internet searches in the weeks leading up to the crime. She also purchased a strong cleaning agent to try and erase traces. The measures she used were so intense that within just a few days, certain remains had been significantly altered. Morishima stored these in her apartment's freezer, bathroom, and even a closet at the shared house where they had once lived together. On December 25, when Sawako failed to arrive for her family's Christmas gathering, her father became immediately concerned. He knew his daughter's character well enough to understand that she would never miss such an important family occasion without explanation. After waiting and trying to contact her throughout the day, he reported her missing to the authorities. His instinct that something was terribly wrong would prove tragically accurate. As investigators began searching for Sawako, Morishima attempted to maintain the illusion that her friend was simply missing. She sent text messages from Sawako's phone to various contacts, creating false communications to suggest that Sawako was still alive and traveling. These messages were carefully crafted to buy time and deflect suspicion from Morishima herself. She also told investigators that Sawako had asked her to withdraw the money from her bank account, attempting to explain away the financial transactions. The investigation intensified over the following days as police found no trace of Sawako despite extensive searches. On December 29, 4 days after she was reported missing, investigators obtained a search warrant for Morishima's apartment. What they discovered there would shock even experienced detectives and forensic specialists. Inside the bathroom and freezer, they found concealed remains that were later identified through DNA analysis as belonging to Sawako. When confronted with this evidence, Morishima initially maintained her story about finding Sawako collapsed. She told investigators she had hidden the remains in a panic to avoid being blamed for her friend's sudden passing. However, as the investigation progressed and more evidence emerged, the premeditated nature of the crime became undeniable. The internet searches, the calculated purchases, and the systematic disposal of evidence all pointed to careful planning rather than panicked reaction. During her detention, Morishima provided additional statements through her lawyer that revealed more about her motivations. She admitted that she had been struggling financially and had used Sawako's identity to obtain loans. She explained that she had been afraid the authorities would discover her fraud if Sawako's passing was investigated properly. In a particularly disturbing revelation, she told investigators that she thought people would be less saddened if Sawako simply went missing, rather than if they learned she had lost her life. The case proceeded through the Japanese legal system, with Morishima facing multiple charges. On March 28, 2016, the Osaka District Public Prosecutor's Office formally indicted her on charges of murder, robbery, and destruction of a corpse. The prosecution built their case around the evidence of premeditation, the financial fraud, and the calculated attempt to conceal the crime. They argued that Morishima had planned to eliminate Sawako as a way to escape the consequences of her financial crimes and the mounting pressure of her debt. During the trial proceedings, the defense attempted to present Morishima's difficult circumstances as mitigating factors. They described her financial desperation and suggested that her actions following Sawako's passing were motivated by fear rather than malice. The defense also tried to characterize her internet searches as typical behavior for someone in distress, arguing that linking them to a premeditated plan was an exaggeration by the prosecution. They portrayed her as someone who had made terrible decisions under extreme pressure rather than a calculating individual. However, the prosecution's case proved overwhelming. The evidence showed a clear progression from financial fraud to planning and executing what Morishima herself had searched for as the perfect crime. Her methodical approach to disposing of evidence, her attempts to impersonate Sawako after the crime, and her calculated use of the victim's financial resources all demonstrated a level of premeditation that contradicted claims of panic or accident. The prosecution also emphasized the extreme cruelty of concealing and tampering with Sawako's remains, describing it as a violation of human dignity beyond the initial crime. On June 30, 2017, presiding Judge Tomo Shibayama delivered the verdict in the Osaka District Court. Terumi Morishima was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment. In delivering the sentence, Judge Shibayama specifically noted the premeditated nature of the crime, stating that Morishima had clearly searched the internet for methods of eliminating someone and hiding evidence. The judge described her actions as cruel and malicious, emphasizing that the responsibility was heavy. The judge's ruling addressed Morishima's defense directly, calling her explanation for Sawako's passing unnatural. He noted that her systematic destruction of evidence and her methodical approach to concealing the crime demonstrated clear intent rather than panic. The court found that she had committed the crime specifically for the purpose of financial gain, using Sawako's death to escape the consequences of her fraud. The life sentence reflected the severity of the crime and the calculated nature of her actions. During the trial, Morishima was observed wiping tears with a white handkerchief, showing emotion as the evidence was presented. Sawako's father, who attended the proceedings, was visibly devastated as he heard the details of what had happened to his daughter. The courtroom atmosphere was heavy with grief as the full scope of the crime became clear to everyone present. The defense announced their intention to appeal the life sentence, though the overwhelming evidence made the likelihood of success minimal. The case sent shockwaves through the local community and beyond, highlighting the vulnerability of young people living in shared accommodations. It also raised questions about the screening processes for communal living arrangements and the warning signs of financial desperation that can lead to devastating crimes. The systematic nature of Morishima's deception and violence served as a stark reminder of how trust between roommates and friends can be exploited by those driven to desperate measures. Sawako Watanabe was 25 years old when she lost her life on December 24, 2015, a victim of someone she had trusted and considered a friend. Her father's love and his immediate concern when she failed to appear for Christmas dinner demonstrated the strong family bonds that had defined her life. The tragedy serves as a reminder of how financial desperation and moral bankruptcy can destroy innocent lives, leaving families and communities to grapple with incomprehensible loss and the betrayal of fundamental human trust. The Indiana teen who went to meet her boyfriend and never returned. On a quiet December night in Mishawaka, Indiana, a 17-year-old girl walked out her back door to meet the father of her unborn child, carrying hopes for their future and a conversation that would never happen. Brina Mackenzie Rausilang was born into a world where she would face challenges that tested her strength from an early age. Her biological parents had separated, leaving her to navigate the complex dynamics of a broken family structure. Dave Rausilang, her father, and her stepmother Nicole tried to provide stability, but Brina primarily lived with her biological mother in their Mishawaka home. The custody arrangement meant that her time was divided between households, creating a sense of rootlessness that followed her through her teenage years. Despite these family circumstances, Brina found her place at Mishawaka High School. She was known for her warmth and genuine desire to connect with others. Her father described her as the nicest, sweetest, most innocent girl you'd ever meet. At school, she threw herself into activities that brought her joy and purpose. She was a former cheerleader who had transitioned to serving as the football team manager, a role that kept her close to the school's athletic programs. Her stepmother later shared that Brina had also worked as a softball coach, showing her dedication to helping younger students. Friends remembered her infectious school spirit and her ability to make anyone feel welcome. Brina carried dreams beyond high school. She spoke often about attending college and hoped to become an athletic trainer, combining her love of sports with her desire to help others recover and succeed. Her family saw her as someone with limitless potential, a young woman who approached life with optimism despite the challenges she faced at home. During her time as football team manager, Brina developed a relationship with Aaron Romeo Trejo, a 16-year-old player on the team. The two had known each other since grade school, sharing a connection that went back years. Aaron was a student athlete who appeared to fit in well with his teammates, but beneath the surface, he carried his own struggles and pressures that few people recognized. By the spring of 2018, Brina discovered she was pregnant. The news brought a mix of emotions and uncertainty. At 17, she was still navigating her own future while now facing the reality of becoming a mother. The pregnancy progressed quietly for months as Brina tried to process what this meant for her college plans and her relationship with Aaron. As the months passed, Brina's pregnancy became more difficult to hide. By December 2018, she was 6 months along, well into her second trimester. According to court documents, she had not immediately told Aaron about the pregnancy when she first discovered it. The delay created tension between them, as Aaron later expressed frustration that she had waited so long to share the news. The relationship between the teenagers had grown strained as the reality of their situation set in. Neither Aaron nor Brina had initially wanted to have a baby at their young age. Aaron, in particular, became increasingly distressed by the situation. Court records later revealed that he felt trapped by the timing, believing that Brina's delay in telling him about the pregnancy had eliminated the option for an abortion. During the week leading up to December 8, 2018, Aaron's thoughts grew increasingly troubled. According to his later confession to police, he began planning something harmful. He spent days considering how to escape the situation that felt overwhelming to his teenage mind. The weight of impending fatherhood, combined with his immaturity and inability to cope with the stress, led him down a path that would destroy multiple lives. On the evening of Saturday, December 8, 2018, Aaron reached out to Brina. He told her he wanted to talk about the pregnancy and their situation. It was the first time in months that he had initiated contact with her, which gave Brina hope that they might finally have a productive conversation about their future. They arranged to meet in the alley behind her mother's house around 11 o'clock that night. When Brina told her mother she was going outside to speak with Aaron, her mother understood the importance of the conversation. This was the father of her grandchild, and Brina needed to have this discussion. Her mother watched as Brina walked out the back door, expecting her daughter to return within an hour or so with news about how the conversation had gone. But Aaron came to that meeting with a plan Brina never could have imagined. Hidden on his person, he carried a knife from his home. He later told investigators that he brought it because he believed it would end things quickly. He had also brought a black plastic bag, which he admitted he thought he would need. When Brina approached Aaron in the alley that night, she likely expected a difficult but necessary conversation about their unborn child. Instead, she found herself facing someone who had already decided the outcome. According to Aaron's confession, they began discussing the pregnancy, but the conversation quickly turned into an argument. Aaron expressed his anger and frustration that she had waited too long to tell him, eliminating what he saw as their options. In that dark alley, Aaron made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He attacked Brina, ending her life. The medical examiner later confirmed she had sustained fatal injuries, and the manner of her passing was ruled a homicide. Afterwards, Aaron placed the black plastic bag over Brina and carried her to a dumpster located behind a nearby restaurant. To eliminate evidence, he threw her cell phone and the knife into a river that ran through Mishawaka. He then returned home, leaving Brina's family to discover that she had vanished. When Brina's mother woke up around 1 o'clock on Sunday morning and realized her daughter had not returned home, concern immediately set in. She knew that Brina was responsible and would not stay out this late without letting her know. Worried about her daughter and grandchild, she walked several blocks to Aaron's house to ask if he knew where Brina might be. Aaron answered the door and calmly told Brina's mother that her daughter had never shown up for their planned meeting. He claimed that he had waited in the alley for several minutes, but when Brina didn't arrive, he had simply gone home. He also told the worried mother that he had lost his cell phone, which explained why she couldn't reach him. His performance was convincing enough that Brina's mother left his house believing his story. By 4:30 that morning, with no sign of her daughter, Brina's mother called the Mishawaka Police Department to report her missing. Officers responded quickly, understanding the urgency of a missing pregnant teenager. When they learned that Aaron was supposedly the last person who was meant to see Brina, they went to his house to speak with him. Aaron repeated the same story he had told Brina's mother. He maintained that she had never arrived for their meeting and that he had no idea where she might be. When officers asked him to send a message to Brina's phone to see if she would respond, Aaron claimed he didn't have a service plan and could only use Wi-Fi. This was later proven to be false. As the morning progressed, police began searching the area around Brina's home. In the alley where Aaron claimed he had waited for her, officers discovered several concerning items. They found Brina's glasses and a hat that appeared to have signs of a struggle. As they expanded their search, they located more evidence pointing to foul play. The search led officers to a dumpster behind a restaurant near Brina's home. Inside, they made the heartbreaking discovery that would devastate 2 families and an entire community. Brina's body was found inside, her head and upper torso covered by a black plastic bag. The 17-year-old who had walked out of her home the night before with hopes for a conversation about her future was gone. With this discovery, the investigation immediately focused on Aaron. Police transporting him and his parents to the station for formal questioning. Initially, Aaron continued to maintain his innocence, repeating his story about waiting in the alley and going home when Brina never appeared. However, when investigators confronted Aaron with the physical evidence they had found, his composure began to break down. Detective Jerry Mullins pressed him about inconsistencies in his story and the evidence that contradicted his claims. When asked directly if he and Brina had argued about the pregnancy, Aaron quietly responded, "Yes." From that point, Aaron's confession came in stages. He admitted that neither he nor Brina had wanted to have the baby. He expressed his anger that she had waited too long to tell him about the pregnancy, making an abortion impossible. When Detective Mullins asked what Aaron had done about his feelings regarding the situation, Aaron delivered the words that would define the case. "I took action. I took her life," Aaron told investigators. Aaron went on to provide details about how he had planned the attack. He revealed that he had been considering harming Brina and their unborn child for approximately a week before he acted. He explained that he had deliberately chosen to use a knife because he believed it would be effective. He described how he had brought the black plastic bag from his home, knowing he would need it. The confession continued as Aaron detailed the events of that Saturday night. He told investigators how he had attacked Brina in the alley and then concealed her remains in the dumpster. He admitted to disposing of the evidence by throwing her phone and the weapon into the river. The autopsy conducted by the St. Joseph County Coroner's Office confirmed the details of Aaron's confession. The examination revealed that Brina had sustained fatal injuries. The medical examiner also determined that her scarf had been tied so tightly around her neck that her breathing was restricted. The manner of her passing was officially ruled a homicide. On Monday, December 10, 2018, the St. Joseph County Prosecutor's Office filed formal charges against Aaron. He was charged as an adult with 1 count of murder in connection with Brina's loss of life and 1 count of feticide for the loss of their unborn child. Under Indiana law, defendants aged 16 or older who are accused of murder are automatically tried as adults, regardless of other circumstances. Aaron's arraignment took place on Tuesday, December 11, 2018. During the proceeding, which was conducted via teleconference with Aaron appearing from jail, Judge John Marnocher entered a preliminary plea of not guilty on his behalf. This was a procedural step, since Aaron did not yet have legal representation. The judge denied bond, citing Aaron as a high-risk defendant due to the nature of the charges. The courtroom that day held both Aaron's family members and friends of Brina's family. Aaron's relatives were visibly emotional, consoling each other before the hearing began. As they left the courthouse, their grief was apparent to everyone present. A friend of Brina's brother Lance also attended, representing the many people in the community who were struggling to understand how this tragedy had occurred. The case moved through the court system over the following months as both families tried to cope with their losses. Aaron remained in custody without bond while his legal team was assembled. The community of Mishawaka, meanwhile, struggled to process how 2 teenagers they had known since childhood could be connected to such a devastating crime. On October 30th, 2019, nearly 11 months after Brina's death, Aaron appeared in St. Joseph County Superior Court to change his plea. Standing before Judge John Marnocher, he pleaded guilty to 1 count of murder and 1 count of feticide. The plea agreement meant that Aaron accepted full responsibility for both Brina's loss of life and the loss of their unborn child. The sentencing phase of the case took place on January 7, 2020. Judge Marnocher sentenced Aaron, who was now 17 years old, to a total of 65 years in prison. He received 55 years for the murder conviction and an additional 10 years for the feticide conviction. The sentences would run consecutively, meaning Aaron would serve the full 65 years. During the sentencing hearing, the impact on both families was evident. Brina's stepmother, Nicole, had previously told reporters about the kind of person Brina had been. She remembered Brina as someone who had been involved in cheerleading, softball coaching, and serving as the football team manager. The family had established a GoFundMe account to help with funeral expenses, which raised over $76,000 from community members who wanted to support them during their grief. Aaron's family also faced their own devastating loss. His aunts spoke to reporters, describing Aaron as far from being a monster and expressing their own struggle to understand what had happened. They had watched a teenage boy they loved become responsible for an unthinkable crime. The case had broader implications for the Mishawaka community. The high school where both teenagers had been students held a football banquet on the same Sunday that Brina's body was discovered. What should have been a celebration of the team's successful season instead became a moment of tragedy as families learned about the loss of their team manager and the arrest of one of their players. Superintendent Dean Spiker later described how families had come expecting to celebrate and instead learned of the devastating events. Brina Mackenzie Rausilang was 17 years old when she lost her life on December 8, 2018. Her unborn daughter, whom the family later named Aurora Mackenzie Rausilang, was also lost that night. They had been looking forward to meeting Aurora and watching Brina become the mother they knew she could be. Instead, both lives were cut short by a teenager who chose violence over conversation, planning over compassion, and selfishness over responsibility. The family of Brina Rausilang continues to carry the weight of their loss, holding on to memories of a young woman who dreamed of college, loved helping others through athletics, and brought warmth to everyone she met. Their grief serves as a reminder of the devastating consequences that can result when young people feel overwhelmed by circumstances and choose irreversible actions instead of seeking help and support. The mind control killer, the Futoshi Matsunaga case. The small city of Kitakyushu in Fukuoka Prefecture, Japan, had always been a quiet place where families raised their children in safety and trust. But in the spring of 2002, that peace was shattered when a 17-year-old girl ran to police with a story so disturbing that investigators initially struggled to believe it. What she revealed would uncover one of Japan's most horrifying criminal cases, a nightmare that spanned years and claimed 7 innocent lives through manipulation so twisted that it defied comprehension. The girl, trembling as she spoke to officers, described years of captivity, systematic cruelty, and witnessing acts so shocking that they defied belief, committed by people she loved against each other. Her testimony would expose Futoshi Matsunaga, a man who had perfected the art of psychological control to such a degree that he could orchestrate horrific acts without ever directly taking a life himself. Alongside him was Junko Ogata, a woman who had been transformed from a gentle preschool teacher into his willing accomplice. Futoshi Matsunaga was born on April 28, 1961, in the Kokurakita ward of Kitakyushu. From the outside, his childhood appeared blessed. His family operated a successful tatami mat business, and when he was 7, they relocated to Yanagawa, where his father took over a futon business. Young Futoshi had everything a child could want, perhaps too much. Those who knew the family described him as incredibly spoiled, a boy who learned early that charm and manipulation could get him whatever he desired. In school, Matsunaga's intelligence shone brightly. He consistently ranked among the top students in his class and naturally assumed leadership roles, serving as class president and captain of various clubs. His good looks made him popular with girls, and teachers initially saw a young man destined for great things. But beneath this polished exterior, troubling patterns began to emerge. While students admired him, teachers grew concerned about his habitual lying and rule-breaking behavior. The first serious warning sign came during his high school years when he was caught engaging in inappropriate conduct with a junior high school student. The incident forced his transfer to an all-boys school, but even this consequence seemed to barely register with him. He graduated and married at 19, quickly becoming a father. But marriage did little to curb his wandering nature. Despite his wedding vows, Matsunaga maintained relationships with at least 10 other women. In October 1982, while still married, Matsunaga reconnected with Junko Ogata, a former schoolmate from Yanagawa. Junko had grown up in a wealthy, respected family in Kyurum, Fukuoka Prefecture. She was known as a gentle, kind person who had found work in a preschool, caring for children with the same tenderness she had always shown. She had remained inexperienced in romantic relationships, which made her particularly vulnerable to Matsunaga's practiced charm. When Matsunaga promised to marry Junko in 1984, Her mother Shizumi immediately recognized the danger. Shizumi had seen through his facade and strongly opposed the relationship, witnessing firsthand how he subjected her daughter to severe mistreatment. Her opposition enraged Matsunaga, and in an act of intimidation, he overpowered Shizumi to assert his control. This served as both punishment and warning, demonstrating the lengths he would go to maintain dominance. By 1985, Matsunaga had isolated Junko completely from her family's support. He convinced her that her family despised her, pointing to a suicide attempt as proof of their rejection. Broken and believing she had nowhere else to turn, Junko moved in with him, beginning a relationship that would transform her from a caring teacher into something unrecognizable. That same year, Matsunaga purchased a building to operate his futon business. But the third floor became something far more sinister than a workplace. There, he began subjecting employees to electric shocks, testing and refining the techniques he would later use to torment his victims. He would scream at workers about imaginary spirits stealing their fortune, mixing pseudo-religious terminology with psychological manipulation. By 1992, through various fraudulent schemes and blackmail operations, he had stolen approximately 180 million yen, equivalent to about $2. 2 million. The first lives lost to Matsunaga's manipulations began in the mid-1990s. A married woman with 3 children fell under his influence in April 1993, convinced to abandon her family for what she believed was love. Matsunaga told her that Junko was merely his sister, another lie in his carefully constructed web of deception. One of her children passed away under mysterious circumstances in September 1993, though police could never prove Matsunaga's involvement. The woman herself died under equally suspicious conditions in March 1994, after Matsunaga had defrauded her of nearly 12 million yen. But it was in 1994 that Matsunaga found his most vulnerable targets in Kumio Toria and his daughter. Kumio had made the fatal mistake of confiding in Matsunaga about his past, sharing details of previous troubles that he thought he could trust with a friend. Matsunaga seized upon this information, using it to blackmail Kumio and force him to confess to crimes he had never even committed. Kumio and his daughter found themselves prisoners in Matsunaga's apartment, subjected to cruelty that defied human comprehension. Matsunaga forced the girl to participate in her father's suffering, making her leave marks on him while he photographed the evidence. He created false confessions, suggesting she had harmed her father, psychological chains that bound her as surely as any physical restraint. Kumio was subjected to repeated electric shocks, forced into humiliating conditions, and systematically broken down until death claimed him on February 26, 1996. The girl, now convinced she was responsible for her father's passing, helped dispose of his remains as Matsunaga commanded. The body was cut apart and thrown into the sea near the Kunisaki Peninsula, erasing the physical evidence of the crime. But the psychological scars remained, binding the girl to her captors through guilt and terror. Soon after, another woman and her daughter fell into Matsunaga's trap, drawn in by promises of marriage and a better life. He claimed to be a Kyoto University graduate, another fabrication designed to inspire trust and admiration. After defrauding her of over 5 million yen, both mother and daughter were confined to his apartment. The woman's desperation eventually drove her to leap from the second floor in March 1997, risking serious injury for freedom. She survived, but required extended care in a mental health facility, while her daughter was finally released. In April 1997, Matsunaga's attention turned to his most devastating target, Junko's own family. When Junko temporarily left him, he contacted her relatives with threats and blackmail, using his earlier intimidation of her mother as leverage. He then staged his own suicide, a theatrical performance designed to manipulate Junko into returning. The plan worked perfectly, and she came back to find herself trapped more completely than ever before. Matsunaga then systematically drew in Junko's entire family. He subjected her married sister Riko to the same intimidation he had used against their mother years earlier. The family, desperate to protect themselves and each other, gave him 63 million yen, approximately $777,000. But money was never enough for Matsunaga. He wanted complete control, and he began implementing the psychological manipulation techniques that would earn him the nickname, the Mind Control Killer. Using methods similar to those employed by cult leaders, Matsunaga isolated each family member and turned them against one another. He created an environment where survival seemed to depend on following his commands, no matter how horrific. The respected Ogata family, once pillars of their community, became prisoners in their own nightmare. On December 21, 1997, Matsunaga commanded Junko to use electric shocks on her 61-year-old father, Takashi. The shocks continued until the elderly man could endure no more, losing his life from the sustained electrical trauma while his daughter was forced to participate. When Junko's mother, Shizumi, began showing signs of mental deterioration from the ongoing trauma, Matsunaga ordered Riko and her husband, Kazuya, to end her suffering on January 20, 1998. The manipulation reached its most heartbreaking point when Matsunaga commanded Kazuya to take the life of his own wife, Riko, while their 10-year-old daughter Aya was forced to hold her mother down. The psychological torment of making family members harm those they loved most was Matsunaga's signature cruelty. Kazuya was then confined to a bathroom where he was left to waste away, finally passing on April 13, 1998. Even the children were not spared from Matsunaga's twisted orchestration. He forced Junko and young Aya to take the life of Riko's 5-year-old son, Yuki. Throughout this period, Matsunaga and Junko subjected little Aya to electric shocks, breaking down her resistance and reshaping her understanding of reality. The final act of this family tragedy came on June 7, 1998, when Kumio's daughter, following Matsunaga's commands, was forced to end Aya's life. After each loss, Matsunaga and Junko would dispose of the remains by cutting them up and boiling them, the smell permeating their apartment building. Other residents heard strange noises and detected the awful odors, but no one realized the horror unfolding just doors away. The remains were discarded in washrooms or thrown into the sea, leaving no physical evidence of the crimes. Matsunaga's manipulation was so complete that he convinced everyone around him that these acts were necessary, that the victims had somehow deserved their fate. He blamed everything on Junko, painting himself as an innocent bystander even as he orchestrated every detail. By the end, only Junko, their 2 children, and Kumio's daughter remained alive from what had once been 2 complete families. The nightmare might have continued indefinitely if not for the courage of Kumio's daughter. On January 30, 2002, the girl managed to escape from the apartment where she had been held captive for years. But Matsunaga found her on February 15 and dragged her back, subjecting her to even more severe electric shock torture. Her second escape attempt on March 6 finally succeeded, and she ran to police with her horrifying testimony. The girl's account seemed almost impossible to believe. She told investigators about years of captivity, systematic torment, and being forced to participate in the deaths of people she loved. But her detailed knowledge of events and the consistency of her story convinced police that she was telling the truth. Officers arrested Matsunaga and Junko on March 7, 2002, when they attempted to retrieve the girl. As the investigation progressed, the full scope of the crimes began to emerge. The pair were charged with multiple counts of ending lives, with formal charges brought throughout 2002 and 2003. The case presented unique challenges for prosecutors, as no physical evidence existed and no remains had been recovered. They relied primarily on the testimonies of Kumio's daughter and Junko herself, who calmly confessed to her role in the crimes. During the trial, the full horror of Matsunaga's methods became clear. Kumio's daughter testified via video conference, her voice shaking as she described years of psychological and physical torment. "To me, Matsunaga and Junko both seemed like devils," she said, her words barely audible through her tears. "The only way to get revenge on me is for them to be sentenced to death. Another woman who had escaped from Matsunaga's captivity also testified, but when she reached the part of her testimony describing the electric shock abuse, she became unable to speak properly due to mental shock. The presiding judge had to temporarily adjourn the proceedings. When the trial resumed, she managed to utter only one trembling phrase: "Please end Matsunaga's life." Riko's mother-in-law, Kazuya's mother, appeared as a witness and glared at Junko with years of accumulated grief and rage. "When our deceased granddaughter begged to return home, didn't you feel anything when you gave birth to a child?" she demanded. The question hung in the courtroom air, highlighting the incomprehensible cruelty of making a grandmother lose her family to manipulation and control. Throughout his trial, Matsunaga maintained his innocence, insisting that Junko and the other women had fabricated their stories about him. He claimed that the women's deaths had nothing to do with him, asking what motive he could possibly have for taking 7 lives. His testimony was filled with contradictions and inconsistencies, forcing him to retract statements multiple times. Even while discussing the devastating loss of 7 lives, he spoke in a casual, almost joking tone that shocked everyone present. Matsunaga's defense crumbled under the weight of evidence and witness testimony. His claims that he wasn't present during certain events were contradicted by detailed accounts from survivors. His attempts to blame the crimes entirely on Junko fell apart when compared to the consistent testimonies of those who had witnessed his control and manipulation firsthand. The prosecution's final statement on March 2, 2005, painted a clear picture of the relationship between the two defendants. The planner, Matsunaga, who had no concept of good or evil, and the executor, Junko, who faithfully carried out the execution, were reduced to a relationship that could be said to be 2 axles of a wheel, the prosecutor declared. He described their crimes as one of the worst in Japanese criminal history and requested the death penalty for both defendants. On September 28, 2005, the Fukuoka District Court delivered its verdict. Both Matsunaga and Junko were sentenced to death by hanging. The court recognized that while Takashi's death was the result of injuries from electric shocks, the other cases constituted clear instances of deliberate termination of life. The judge noted the consistency of Junko's testimony with that of the surviving witnesses and acknowledged her attempts to save her father's life, even while being forced to harm him. Both defendants appealed their sentences, but their fates diverged in the appellate court. On September 26, 2007, the Fukuoka High Court upheld Matsunaga's death sentence, but commuted Junko's sentence to life imprisonment. The court recognized that Matsunaga had exerted such complete psychological control over Junko that she could not be held fully responsible for her actions. Prosecutors appealed Junko's reduced sentence to the Supreme Court, but the life sentence was ultimately upheld. The case left deep scars on all who survived it. Kumio's daughter, the brave young woman whose testimony brought justice, underwent extensive mental health treatment to cope with years of trauma. The surviving children from both families faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives after witnessing unthinkable events. The case became so notorious that most Japanese media outlets refused to report the full details, considering them too disturbing for public consumption. The crimes were so unprecedented that prosecutors declared the case without comparison in the criminal history of Japan. The ability of one man to manipulate entire families into destroying themselves challenged fundamental assumptions about human nature and free will. Legal experts and psychologists continue to study the case, trying to understand how such complete psychological control was possible. Matsunaga remains on death row in Japan, still awaiting execution more than 2 decades after his arrest. His case has inspired books, documentaries, and even a Netflix film, though most adaptations struggle to convey the full weight of what transpired. The manipulation techniques he perfected continue to be studied by law enforcement and mental health professionals, serving as a dark lesson in the depths of human cruelty and the power of psychological control. The Futoshi Matsunaga case stands as one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern history, a reminder that evil can wear a charming face and that the human capacity for manipulation knows no bounds. The 7 innocent lives lost to his twisted control schemes represent not just individual tragedies, but a collective loss that continues to haunt all who learn their story. Our hearts go out to the victims and their surviving family members, who endure the lasting pain of unimaginable loss and the knowledge that those they loved were forced to participate in their own destruction.